Good evening. Welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. For many people, relationships have become much more complicated in 2020. In addition to all the usual issues that come with sharing a household, the stress of limited finances, losing your job, co-parenting, and underlying health conditions have all been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. If your marriage or relationship was on shaky ground before this, chances are the unrelenting stress of this pandemic, in addition to heading into a second wave of infections, is becoming the breaking point. And while there comes a moment in many relationships where the partnership is just not working anymore and where separation or divorce is simply an unavoidable next step, couples who are dissolving their households during COVID-19 are facing new challenges. And some of those challenges are so daunting that they have couples undecided when or if it's the right time to bow out. It's a particularly trying time for a marriage to break down right now, but tonight's panel of guests will help you navigate some of the pieces of this journey, sharing the latest research, valuable resources, and their own hard-won wisdom to help you along the way. First, it's my pleasure to introduce Keith Riddell, who is the co-founder of Unmarry.ca. The service is a fresh approach to separation and divorce in Ontario. Access to justice is a key component of Unmarry.ca's mission statement, and they strive to assist clients through separation and divorce with less friction, faster, and at a fraction of the price of the traditional adversarial model. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thanks, Barbara.
Next, it's an honor to welcome Dr. Ariel Cooperberg. She is an associate professor of sociology and women's gender and sexuality studies at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and is also a senior expert at the Council on Contemporary Families. Her research has been discussed in over 150 news stories around the world. It has examined marriage and divorce and social changes in families and in romantic and sexual relationships in the 20th and 21st century. She's most well known for her research showing that living together before marriage doesn't actually cause couples to divorce, and this finding has actually overturned decades of previous research. Thank you for joining us, Ariel.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, I'm so pleased to welcome Tara Mandarano, who is a Best of the Net nominated writer, poet, and editor, as well as a patient advocate in the mental health and chronic illness communities. Her work has been published in a variety of outlets, including The Washington Post, Huffington Post, Today's Parent, Chatelaine, and Canadian Living. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Tara.
Thank you for inviting me, Barbara.
Keith, I want to start with you. You went through a difficult divorce yourself, and the experience is what motivated you to start your new company, Unmarry.ca. Talk us through your journey and how it made you realize that there was a need to make things easier for couples who are going through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Barbara. So, look, about 4 years ago, my ex and I came to the conclusion that, our relationship was finished as husband and wife. And, it took us some time to get to that point. And then, we decided, okay, we no longer want to be married. So now what do we do? And at the time, I was working as a process improvement director for a large law firm on Bay Street. So I thought, well, I know plenty of lawyers. Let's just get out there and see what needs to happen. I mean, the way that my ex and I were thinking at the time is that we didn't hate each other. We didn't have a lot of complex, finances or anything else to unravel. We were just really ready to get on with the next stage of our lives. So I asked around the firm and I found the name of a few family law lawyers. And I was really blown away by the response that I got when I interviewed a couple. One guy's office I walked into, he informed me that he was going to be charging $650 an hour, and
Wow.
that I needed to hand over a $10,000 retainer, and then started to go through the list of charges of other people who worked on the file. I just about fell off my seat. I thought, my goodness, I mean, we don't want to be married anymore, but at the same time, too, we're looking at somewhere between $20,000 perhaps, just to amicably split things up. So me being a process guy, I looked at the situation and it just boggled my mind. It was like, come on, there has to be a better way. I couldn't imagine that every person in Ontario that wanted to get divorced, that this was the only option to them. So it was really that situation that led, pardon me, to try and investigate, is there a better way to do this? And with the development of unmarried.ca, I think we have found a different way.
So how did you finally end your marriage? Did you end up finding a lawyer you could actually afford?
Yes, I did. It still cost some money, but yeah, I found a more affordable lawyer. I think there were two things that I really learned through the process that just as a guy, sharing experience that went through separation and divorce, there were two things that really jumped out to me. One, my ex and I went through separation counseling. And you know what? I'm really glad that we did. Because a lot of times, when I talk to lawyers, when they share, some of the experiences they have with their clients come and talk to them fresh off the decision that they and their ex, or soon to be ex, don't want to be together anymore. So what happens is that you get people that are still really emotionally charged and angry in many instances, making some of the most important decisions about their lives and their ex-spouse's life, and indeed if they have kids, their kids' lives. So one thing that I'm really glad that my ex and I did is that we went and got separation counseling. So we went for a few weeks, and it was really helpful for us because we were able to talk out some of the issues, get out some of the anger that we were feeling or some of the frustration, although there wasn't a lot of that in our instance. And then get ourselves into a position where we could start to figure out, okay, how can we make the best decisions for us? And how can we make the best decisions for the kids? So we got some guidance just from an emotional point of view about how to deal with how we were feeling. And I got to say, it put us in a much better position to start thinking about, okay, what do we want to do moving forward? And how can we act rationally more than emotionally? It's still, one of the most dramatic changes in anyone's life. And then the other thing that I would advise folks, just again, as a guy that went through the process, is to really learn about your options, about what does it mean and what do you need to do to get separated and divorced in Ontario. Because like a lot of folks, my knowledge about what happens in the legal process is largely derived from, TV and the media, right? You see it in countless movies where somebody makes a decision to split up, and then the first thing they do is they're reaching for, the name of a real bulldog or pit bull lawyer that's going to stick it to the other side. And you know what? That's something that I think once you take the emotionality out of things and you start to learn about your options, again, you get much more in a headspace where you're making rational decisions rather than emotional decisions that not only cost your relationship with you and your ex, you and your kids, but also cost you in real dollars and cents fashion, and because you didn't find the appropriate solution for you and your needs.
It's amazing how much more productive a cooler head can be. And I want to switch to Tara, who is currently going through a divorce now. You're sort of fresh going through the process. Take us through your journey and how it all came about.
Well, it is pretty fresh and raw, as you said. So on August 6th, my husband came to me one morning and said that he wanted to separate. And we had a conversation 6 weeks before where he admitted that he was struggling and needed space, but we recommitted to the relationship. And that's why it just kind of really broadsided me when he asked for the separation. And just dealing with it against the backdrop of COVID has just made it so much more difficult to process. And the reasons mainly that he decided that he could not go on with the marriage. There was issues on both sides, but basically I was managing some chronic pain over the last few years, so that sort of forced him into the caretaker role. We had very different parenting styles, which we would clash about, and we didn't really communicate enough or, crucially, in my opinion, spend enough time together, especially during the pandemic. The days were so stressful that we would need to decompress at night, and instead of watching a show together or something funny to lift our spirits, we would just retreat to different levels of the house and go on our screens, and then wake up the next day and start it all over again. So for me, that wasn't like a recipe for success to try and make the marriage stronger through COVID. And I think what the pandemic did is it brought all the issues to the surface that we weren't dealing with, and it brought it to the boiling point, and suddenly it was overwhelming.
Do you think you would have gone your separate ways if COVID hadn't happened?
I think we may have, but I think it wouldn't have happened this quickly in this kind of like pressure cooker environment. I think those early quarantine days, especially when we couldn't see basically anybody, including our extended family, for support, they really did a number on us. And not having that village and, getting a hit to your income and everything combined, it just, I think it had way more of an impact than it would have if we were just in pre-pandemic times.
I'm so sorry that you're going through this, Tara. I want to switch to Ariel. We only have about a minute and a half before we go to break, but we'll dive deeper into your research when we come back. But over the next minute, I want to ask you, does your research show that COVID is kind of the chicken or the egg? Has it been playing as big of a role in seeing a spike of divorces, I guess, around the world?
So early research has shown that in places like China, divorce has spiked, especially after some of their lockdowns were lifted a little bit. So I think divorce is going up. The pandemic is kind of bringing to light a lot of issues that people had and had maybe been avoiding, like Tara said. So we're seeing kind of an increase in divorce as people are spending more time with their spouses than before, and maybe some of the problems they had been avoiding are now, it's impossible to avoid.
Absolutely. And I want to get into some of those problems as well as maybe some tips of going through the process when we get back after the break. So don't go away. We'll be right back after this.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Where did she come from? She's dressed in black and white. She told me everything is gonna be alright.
Are you a woman experiencing abuse? Do you know a woman experiencing abuse? Help is available any time of day or night. ShelterSafe.ca is an online map that helps you find a women's shelter or transition house that meets your needs so you can live a life free from violence. ShelterSafe.ca. Help is just a click away.
I'm Daniela Croco, and I'm a holistic chef. I take traditional and classic recipes and turn them into nutrient-dense, delicious, and simple eats. I love to focus on using ingredients that you already have on hand. This helps reduce waste in the kitchen and also helps save money on groceries. Join us every week for Simply Cooking by Chef right here on Rogers TV.
Each week on Grill This, Smoke That, Steph Legary showcases delicious recipes from across Canada, all done on the grill. Join Steph and his special guests on Grill This, Smoke That, Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on Rogers TV.
Hey everybody, it's Jennifer Clark. Join me here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock for Gen Zen TV, where I answer your questions, one caller at a time, putting the soul back into solutions. Join me here Tuesdays at 1 on Rogers TV.
welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're talking about how to navigate the process of divorce during COVID-19. The overall stresses of COVID-19, financial, emotional, and physical, are forcing some people to take a good hard look at their partners. Tensions are high, and there's nowhere to go. Research shows that spending more time together in close quarters can increase the chance of divorce. In China, Bloomberg reported a record high divorce spike in March after couples emerged from lockdown. Some staff members didn't even have time to take a drink of water because so many couples were waiting in line to file for divorce. Divorce rates increased by nearly 97% during the lockdown imposed by Saudi Arabia earlier in June this year. And reports of domestic violence have surged too in Japan, Hong Kong, and other places earlier this year as well. And the dating site Ashley Madison, which is specifically for married people who are looking to cheat, reports that its membership has jumped by 167% between March and the end of April compared to the same period last year. Ariel, we were chatting a little bit during the break about some of the most common causes of divorce, and you mentioned that infidelity is one of the leading causes, along with unemployment, which I guess leads to precarious finances.
Yeah, so infidelity is the cause of about 1 in 5 divorces. Unemployment and financial stress related to unemployment, things like substance abuse. When people are unemployed, they're more likely to use substances. But financial stress is a major cause of divorce. And as you mentioned, domestic violence. So unemployment is linked to domestic violence. Domestic violence is the cause of about 1 in 5 divorces directly, but many couples who divorce who don't say it was, they were like, if you ask them why they divorced, they wouldn't say domestic violence was the main cause, but many couples who divorce do experience domestic violence as well. So one thing we're seeing with COVID and the lockdowns is an increase in domestic violence, which is probably contributing to increases in divorce.
I read a recent study from the University of Washington that said generally divorces increase after the summer months or after a holiday when couples might be together for a longer period of time. Do you think that COVID needs to be in a category of its own, I guess, because you have those added elements of uncertainty and then the health issue, of course, as well?
I think there are similarities to other sorts of things. So, you know, unemployment went up during the Great Recession, and that caused family stressors as well. But coronavirus has its own specific stressors, right? So it has the unemployment part. It also has illness. It has homeschooling and having to now deal with, educating your children while people are working, right? And there was a new study out of Indiana University which said something like 40% of mothers are increasingly frustrated with their partners during coronavirus, and the ones who are most frustrated are working mothers who also don't have access to childcare. So I think that's putting a major strain on relationships. And the other thing is social isolation. As Tara mentioned, she said, in previous times we would have been able to talk to my extended family or maybe friends. Now people are isolated from, you're not going out with your friends, you're not meeting up with family, you don't have grandparent care, or meeting up with your kids' grandparents, you're not going to your in-person job and having those kind of informal chats with people in the hallway. There's no playgrounds, there's no daycare. So there's no way to kind of let off steam and talk to people about your problems. You're just, there with your problems all the time.
And it's amazing how not having access to those little things can really, really, really add up over time. Tara, I want to go back to you. How many other couples do you know who are separating right now?
At the moment, I would say I know about 3 or 4 other couples that are separating right now. And I think there's many more that aren't admitting to it during the process. Part of the reason that I'm speaking up is because I want people to hear a personal viewpoint of someone actually going through separation and heading to divorce. Because when it happened to me in August, I felt like I wasn't reading any stories or articles from the actual people's point of view that were actually going through this awful process. It was mainly statistics and news, like the China stats that you mentioned. So for me, it is to make people feel less alone, couples that their marriage is crumbling, and to encourage them not to feel shame and embarrassment, because this is an unprecedented stress that marriages are going through right now. And I think even just regular problems that couples have had or that they've not dealt with, instead of just coming up as a normal stress that you could maybe fix easily, it's become quite toxic quite fast. And I think the decisions are being made a lot more quickly to go down the route of divorce or separation, because we've been so forced into confinement during that quarantine period. And like, we're not meant to spend 24 hours a day together, whether that's with your husband or wife or children. And it's just not good for your mental health. So I think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. And as time goes on, we're going to start hearing our own statistic rates about Canada and everywhere else. And I imagine it's going to be quite the same as the rest of the world.
That brings me to ask a question. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm kind of worried about what's going to happen in the winter, especially because I think over the warmer months, people could at least go for walks and get out of the house and get away. But now, you know, in the winter months, a lot of the things that we did have access to do we're not going to have access to those things anymore.
I'm reminded of when I started my career as a reporter in a daily newspaper and sort of working over the Christmas holidays. I remember that the shelters, the women's shelters, were always full, packed to the brim, more so than any other time of year. And the reason for that was because everyone's stuck under one roof. No one has any place to go. And so there are no distractions. There are no ways to let off steam. And inevitably conflict spills out. But abuse aside, obviously, I wanted to ask Keith and Tara, how do you know, or how did you know in your relationships that you were actually incompatible as partners versus, I guess, just going through a really stressful time? Maybe start with you, Tara, because you're going through it and you have the COVID context. How do you know the difference?
For me, it was basically knowing that me and my husband and myself had like radically different opinions on the relationship and whether it could be saved. And I wasn't in favor of having a separation. I thought that we could still work on our issues and, you know, do Zoom therapy, other options, but I had to accept what my husband was saying, because on the morning that it happened, his face just revealed the finality of the decision, and I knew he meant it. And, you know, I ran outside after him into the driveway in my pajamas. I didn't care. I just knew that it was a huge life event. One of the worst things that you can go through was going to be coming my way. And I just felt unprepared for it because I was already so stressed, living with, you know, the constant worry of COVID numbers, of whether to send my daughter back to school, trying to find more jobs. So I would say that my grief and my heartache over this separation has definitely been amplified by COVID. And in many ways, I feel like it's just another disaster to kind of chalk up to the destruction of COVID-19.
And what about you, Keith? You went through a divorce a while back before COVID started. How did you know, and how did you get to a better place?
Well, I mean, I think my situation is a little different than Tara's, because there wasn't an event like somebody cheating on somebody that precipitated the separation and divorce. I mean, I think we were fairly young when we got married. And then, you know, there were just little signs along the way over the years that we didn't really have the same values, that as we were facing more family and, you know, I'm going to say adult decisions about finances and things like that, the original things that had attracted us together, you know, going out and having a good time and all that kind of stuff, you know, once that fades and you start to look at, you know, other issues, you know, the foundations weren't all that solid. And, you know, I think what really triggered it for me was I had the belief that, you know what, I don't want to put my kids through all this drama. We're not arguing and fighting and saying terrible things. So maybe we can just keep this going until, you know, both the boys are out of the house, and then we can get on with it. And I remember just having the realization that, seeing one day, I saw an elderly couple that were just bickering and fighting in a cafe. And I just thought to myself, God, you know, do I want that to be me? And I had the conversation that day with my ex, and I said, you know, look, here's how I'm feeling about things. Where are you at? And she was kind of right there with me. So the toughest thing was thinking about the kids and thinking, okay, we're about to put them through, you know, a massive change. But what clicked it for me is that if my son was to ask me for advice, if he was in a marriage that wasn't working well, what would my advice be to him? And, you know, that's where I really came to the realization that, you know what, my kids need to see me happy, and I can be a better parent being happy. And it was a really tough decision, but once, you know, we kind of became good with it, the two of us, then again, that's where I mentioned we went off to, you know, couples separation counseling, talking about the mechanics, what would it look like, you know, how do we tell the boys, because they were different ages, and that really helped. So there was no real anger so much, like there was obviously built up frustration from along the way, but nobody felt that somebody had done something to the other. And I think having those conversations and really encouraging that with the help of the counselor made a huge difference.
We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, I want to dig deeper into unmarried.ca, as well as some of the stats and trends that you're seeing in Ontario. And of course, Dr. Ariel Cooperberg's research when we come back. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Join us as we look back at previous investiture ceremonies honoring great Canadians. Watch the Order of Canada exclusively on Rogers TV.
Blood in the urine is the most common symptom of bladder cancer. Don't ignore this warning sign, not even once.
Everybody knows not to drink and drive, but some people still think it's okay to take drugs and drive. Police have the authority, the ability, and the tools to determine if drivers are impaired by legal or illegal drugs. And because drug-impaired drivers can pose just as great a risk as drunk drivers, they face the same penalties, like the loss of their driver's license, a criminal record, fines, and more. A message from the RCMP, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and Arrive Alive, Drive Sober.
Ottawa's local shops, restaurants, and services are woven into the fabric of our city. We can all help them during these challenging times. Order from them online, purchase gift certificates to use later, order meals for takeout or delivery, send them messages of support on social media. Please do it today. Learn how at ottawa.ca/buylocal.
Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're talking about how to navigate the difficult journey of divorce during COVID-19. Keith, we talked a little bit about some of the parts of your own divorce journey before we went to break, and I wanted to do a deeper dive into what unmarried.ca is all about. Take us through the process. What kinds of services do you offer, and how does it make it easier for people who are going through a divorce?
Absolutely. Okay, so in a nutshell, what unmarried.ca is an online mediation service for folks that want to get separated and divorced. Okay, so in terms of the overall format, we're mediators, we're not a law firm, and the very existence of mediation is not a new thing for folks that are getting separated and divorced. Although myself, when I was talking about my journey, I didn't even know about that. I just thought that the only option is that you have to go to a lawyer and then it starts from there. So, I mean, I think that's the number one thing, is that this mediation service is an option. And then the other thing about unmarried.ca is that it combines two things. It combines the generation of all the documents that you need to get separated and divorced in Ontario. And when we put them all together, there's actually quite a few. There's a separation agreement, there's a financial statement, there's all the court forms that you need. There's quite a lot of stuff. So if a person was to approach getting separated and divorced on their own without any assistance, there'd be a lot of research that you would have to do. So what unmarried.ca offers the benefits of less lawyer involvement, and then also, but at the same time, rather, gives some guidance and structure to help people go through the process. So let me explain a little bit how it works. If you were to sign up for our service, the cost is $2,499 plus tax for a couple, not per person. So already compared to my experience where it was $10,000 each, and that's just if people play nice, we're already a lot cheaper with this approach. And what the client would do is they get on and they answer an online questionnaire. And this questionnaire asks a bunch of questions and provides the data that will automatically populate all the forms and all the documents that you'll need to get separated and divorced in Ontario. So depending on the complexity of your situation and depending on if you've got access to all the information you need, it can take anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. But the good thing is at the end of that, you hit submit, and then automatically all those documents that you're going to need, including the separation agreement, the financial statement, all the court forms, they're automatically generated as a first draft. So then what that does is that triggers the second part of the service, which is the mediation service. So it's likely that the person that is putting in all the information for the couple, that's their point of view. And it will include also information that they may have discussed with their ex. So the second part of the service is the mediation. So again, this is all done online. We're fully digital. There's no office to visit. And through Zoom, you would meet with one of our mediators, who are lawyers, but they're acting as mediators in this instance. And what they do is they help the couple bridge any gaps that they may have in their various positions about what to do with the division of their assets. What are they doing about spousal support or child support? What's the parenting plan? All of these things are components of the separation agreement. So this mediation approach is really helpful because what it does in a collaborative sense, it gets the couple talking and finding a way without including an adversarial lawyer approach, but how together are we going to solve this problem and bridge the divide on any issues? So in the service that's offered for $24.99, couples get 4 hours of lawyer mediator time. And if they can't get through it during that 4 hours, they can buy additional time as they need. So part of the reason why our service is a lot less expensive than the traditional adversarial lawyer model is a few things. So one, just by the process I've described, the clients are participating in the process. They're not just rolling into a lawyer's office and saying, okay, you know what, here's all my stuff, take care of it. They have to enter, the client have to enter this information into our guided interview. The guided interview is the questionnaire. And there's lots of information explaining, how you fill out certain points, where to get the information. And then they can also book time with the mediator to find out how it works. But by doing all of these steps themselves, it takes out all this activity that your lawyer at $450 to $650 an hour is doing on your behalf. So that's one thing that, from a process point of view, as a process guy, I like to pull in expertise when it's absolutely necessary. If I can do an activity for myself, or somebody at a lesser cost can do that activity, I would much rather that happens than just having somebody at several $100s an hour doing all the things that, some of those things I could do myself. So that's one of the reasons.
Is that an added cost on top of the $24.99? And then my other question is with your service, how long does it take to get a divorce?
Okay, well, so for the $24.99, you get 4 hours of mediator time included in that. And if you go over, then you can buy additional hourly rates time. In terms of how long it takes, well, that really depends on, how far apart the couples are. Do they have all the information? How many drafts do they have to go through on their separation agreement and other documents? So it really depends. I can tell you this, though. Is there a ballpark? I would say that within 6 to 8 weeks, this is something that can get wrapped up. If you were to look at, say, the timing in a traditional lawyer adversarial approach, you can be minimum of 3 months to 5 months. And then if everybody's not playing nice, this can get into the years. And then God forbid you get into litigation, it just goes on from there.
Now, mediation is not for everyone, right? Like there are some couples for whom mediation just wouldn't be a good choice.
Yeah, good question. So I think there's 3 things that would qualify people to be for success with us. So first of all, divorce and separation is something that's governed provincially. So this is just currently for folks that are resident in Ontario. The second point is that if there's anybody looking for the full service law firm, we're not a law firm and we're not full service in that sense. There will be some participation that's required, like the inputting of your information and then joining those mediation sessions. So if that's not for you, then the service won't be effective. And then I would say the third group is that, anybody that's in a high stress situation currently, where certainly if there's anything like domestic violence, this would not be appropriate. And then even if, with this high stress where people are hating each other and they haven't quite got to the step of being able to talk about it coolly and rationally, this may not be for them. And then finally, there's folks that are just hell-bent on litigation. And, in that case, they really need to see.
And what are the numbers that you're seeing in Ontario? Have you seen an increase in inquiries since we've hit the second wave of infections?
Yeah, we're a relatively new service, so we started all our development right at the beginning of COVID back in March, and we were nose to the grindstone deep in coding and whiteboarding and process mapping and all that stuff. So we launched in September. So through colleagues, what we're hearing is that overall, there is a spike in terms of the interest in separation and divorce. As we've seen, that in other countries that may be further ahead in the cycles they've gone through, we've seen that. I can tell you that our phone is ringing off the hook in terms of people inquiring about what are the steps, how does it work. I think there may be some hesitation in folks to act on it immediately if they don't have to, if there's not a compelling reason I got to get out now, just because of the complexity of finding another place to go, all the practicalities that are, impacted through a COVID lockdown.
I want to switch over to Ariel. Tell me about how the field of divorce has changed since you first started researching it. And I didn't ask you this in the beginning, but what compelled you to choose this field of study?
what compelled me to feel. So I think I've been studying divorce for about 15 years. I think some thinking about causes of divorce have changed. So when I was starting the major, the project piece I was working on was whether living together causes divorce, which I found it doesn't once you account for the age at which people are getting together, which goes back to something Keith was saying about how they were very young and then they found their values had changed. So my research looks at things like age at which you're getting together with your partner. People who are getting together at younger ages are divorcing at a higher rate. How I got into this, I guess I started out studying kind of housework and families, and from there I just became more interested in relationships, maybe because I was getting married when I first started studying this, so I was like, I lived with my husband and I was like, I don't want to get divorced. Am I causing myself to get divorced? So I think
has your
personal interest had some...
Has your research on divorce allowed you to have a better marriage?
I think in some respects, I think just my research on doing research on the family has helped in some respects have kind of a more objective view. So for instance, my husband lost his job during the Great Recession, and knowing what I knew about economics and what was happening with families, I think it helped me take a step back and say, like, okay, this isn't his fault. It's not that he's not looking for jobs hard enough. It's this global recession. So I think in that respect, I try not to bring too much of that stuff home with me, though, because I don't want to over intellectualize my relationship. But yeah, I think maybe a little bit. Yeah.
And the most interesting finding so far when it comes to divorce? I'll let you think about that. We're 30 seconds away from heading to break, so maybe I'll let you think about that, and we'll pick up on that when we come back after the break. And then, of course, I'd like to go back to you, Tara, and ask you about some of your tips for people who are going through what you're going through now, your learned wisdom, and then let's wrap it up with unmarried.ca. I know you've got a special offer for people who are experiencing difficulty during COVID-19, so I want to talk more about that. All that and more when we come back after the break. Don't go away.
Behold Emily Carr, painter, about to encounter the force that will consume her life.
How tightly they sealed their secrets from me, humble and pleading before the great trees, awaiting the invitation from the Spirit to come meet me halfway. Nothing is still now. Everything is alive. At last, I knew I must see through the eye of the totem itself, the mythic eye of the forest.
Seldom able to live by her brush, before she died in 1945, Emily Carr was in the first rank of Canadian painters.
This is my country. What I want to express is here, and I love it. Amen.
It was my daughter's birthday. She was blowing out the candles on her cake when we heard coming from the TV. So we stopped and listened, and it helped us get to safety. That's why when I think of my daughter's birthday, because now she gets to keep having them.
Hi, I'm Harriet Clooney, chef here in Ottawa and host of Scrap Cookings. Join me each week and I will show you how to reduce your food waste and save a bit of money. Hope to see you soon.
Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're discussing navigating the journey of divorce during COVID-19. Now, we know that the stresses and losses that are affiliated with COVID-19 or other crises tend to fall disproportionately on people who don't have a lot to begin with. And more specifically, women have suffered disproportionately during the pandemic compared to men because the bulk of the responsibility of childcare tends to fall on them. And this kind of is a great segue with some of the research that you do, Ariel, in terms of childcare and disagreements during COVID. Tell us about some of the things that you're seeing.
Some of the research has shown that many couples are now fighting over things like childcare, or even if they're not outright fighting about it, they have more resentments, especially mothers who are now balancing, employed mothers, especially who have a job and now they're expected to take care of children. And I think some of the expectation is that women automatically do this, right? Women have taken this on, and in many couples, women earn less than their husbands. So and there's just kind of gender ideas about gender that women are the ones in charge when it comes to childcare. And this is leading to resentment because our society is not built in a way that you could actually take care of children while you're working full time. So I think part of what we're seeing is this increased resentment. Part of it is men are not stepping up to do their fair share in some couples. And women also may not know to ask, or they may assume they have to take it upon themselves. So I would say in that respect, kind of...
It's a negotiation.
Yeah, it's a negotiation.
And you sent us some really cute photos that maybe we can pull up here. You sent us a photo of one of your daughters helping you with a very important scientific proposal that you were writing, and another photo as well. Sort of the reality of balancing both worlds at home, and it's difficult for everyone. How do you approach that conversation with your spouse at home?
My husband is a stay-at-home dad right now, so that's how we approach it. Is we have the opposite of a traditional relationship, basically. But I mean, it's hard to work from home even with a stay-at-home dad. We have a 1-year-old and a second grader, and homeschooling is kind of its own thing, and watching its toddler is a second job. So definitely I'm not working as many. Well, I feel like I'm working more hours late at night. Yeah, so that's how we handle it. Is my husband takes care of most of it, and then I'm, not having as much free time to just relax and do things on my own as I used to, I guess.
Yeah, and what are some of the other findings you're coming across? Maybe some surprising trends when it comes to divorce during the pandemic?
I think one thing we're seeing is more couples disagreeing perhaps over how to deal with COVID, whether people should have masks, whether their kids should be going back to school or not, whether they should put their kids in daycare or not. I was just reading a post on Facebook by someone who was saying, I'm like kind of losing my mental health here. I can't deal with this, but my husband's really against putting the kids in daycare. So I think there's disagreements stemming from COVID itself. There's disagreements stemming from kind of the collapse of childcare globally. There's disagreements and just stress from, everything. Life is stressful right now, and that stress is gonna, if you're around one person all the time, that's the person you're gonna end up taking out that stress on. And you may put the blame of that stress on that person. I also think during coronavirus, just people are faced with their own mortality, which makes them think, what do I not want to regret later on? And that could reflect if you already had a relationship which was on kind of shaky ground, but maybe, you went out after work with friends, so you didn't spend as much time together, so you could kind of avoid your problems. Well, you can't avoid them anymore. So I think it's basically a perfect storm for relationships where everything is stressing, there's no outside support, and there's just more reasons to fight and no escape valve to get away from each other,
it's kind
which
of
is just not going to be good for relationships.
It's kind of interesting how we live in this society that's always pushing us to go, 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 more, do this, do that, go here, go there. And it's interesting how by forcing us to slow down and with nowhere to go but inwards inside of ourselves, it's amazing how COVID has actually, increased the stress and increased the self-awareness. And we really have sort of been, it's in our face, those realizations that we may have been running away from for many years. I want to go back to Tara and ask you. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, families have never been completely isolated the way they are now. Even, families, even in hunter-gatherer times, families gathered together in tribes. They weren't all on their own without any social supports. So I think this is really unprecedented in how we're expecting families to do things completely on their own.
Do you think it will have a lasting impact on the family structure moving forward?
I think definitely in terms of things like people are having fewer children now, I believe. The birth rate's going down because people are so uncertain. And there's also, I've heard some studies of coronavirus impacting pregnancies themselves. So I think we're going to see smaller families. It could result in family breakup, but it could also, I'm doing research now on young adults, and we found some couples that were brought closer together before COVID, where they were kind of dating, and now they started living together and, co-quarantining as a result of COVID. So I think it's kind of too early to say how this is going to play out in the long run, but I think it's definitely going to have some impacts.
Going back to Tara, why don't you share with us some of the tips that you have for viewers that are going through this? What has worked for you and not worked for you when it comes to co-parenting your child and kind of getting through this really difficult time?
I would say the first thing that you should do in this situation is contact a lawyer for a free consultation, just to know kind of broadly what your rights are. The second thing I would say is consider, like Keith was saying earlier, whether you want to go down that route, because it is very expensive. My husband and I just both decided on mediation because we don't have a lot of, huge things to settle. And it is way more affordable. And I didn't also realize that you could get bundled services, which means that when you do obtain a lawyer, you don't need them to do every single thing for you and charge that kind of ridiculous retainer. So choosing mediation was a good step for us. I would also say creating a budget spreadsheet if you're planning to maintain 2 different homes to make sure you can actually afford it is a good idea. Putting your children first, if you have any, and trying to think of them and keep as much constant in their life so that they aren't overwhelmed with their world being turned completely upside down. And then the last thing I would say is please ask for help and reach out. This is a new phenomenon, all these COVID separations and divorce, and we don't have our traditional support systems in place, but we can still call our friends, we can still have Zoom chats. We just need to really rely on people and talk about it and not feel ashamed about it, and just try to be as amicable with your ex if it's possible, just for your own mental health and peace of mind, so that you're not constantly being pulled between COVID stress and then your separation stress, that you kind of deal with one at a time to make sure you're not overwhelmed in your mental health state.
What are you doing for self-care right now, Tara?
I'm focusing a lot more on it, to be honest, because there is those 3 or 4 days a week where my daughter isn't at home. We've devised our own casual custody and financial arrangements. So I'm trying to take more time to do things that I enjoy, like reading, listening to music, trying to get out for walks. I also have a therapist, so I keep in touch with her. And we have a weekly Zoom appointment there. So it's just trying to get through the situation the best way you can, whatever works. But for me, it's the reaching out and admitting that you're feeling overwhelmed. It can be really hard for people to admit that, and they might feel like that sense of shame or embarrassment that I mentioned earlier. But kind of 2 months in this situation, I would say that if it wasn't for my family and friends, I would not be really fully functioning today.
Now, I want to switch over to Keith. Now, you actually offer a special promotion or program for couples and families who are going through hardship related to COVID-19. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, the cornerstone of our business, Unmarried.ca, is to improve access to justice for Ontarians and those facing, just insurmountable at times costs associated with separation and divorce. We're very sensitive to that. So our fee is $24.99, but we know that's still a lot of money for somebody that's lost their job, either one or both spouses. So what we're doing is we're offering our services pro bono for folks that are struggling financially on the back of COVID-19. So if you go to our website at unmarried.ca, on the front page, there's a tab there talking about COVID-19 financial support. If you can fill in your information there, what we do is we'll evaluate it, and then because of really high demand, we'll put that application into a lottery, and we'll pick out as many people as we can. But we know that this is a tough time, and we're really trying to help.
That's great, because I'm sure there's a lot of couples out there that could make use of this service. And finally, Keith, your business partner is also your partner in love and life. You're engaged to be married. Congratulations for that. And I'm wondering if you could share with us how you applied the wisdom that you learned going through your divorce to finding love again.
Wow. I just got to say, I mean, I got lucky. I wouldn't want to say this is something that I really engineered, but I mean, if I was to give anybody advice, I mean, it's two things. One, just being older and having a greater sense of self and who I'm and, what's important, and the frustration to me, I think really helps, because when I was younger, you have a less of a sense of that. And then two, just staying open to things. If you want to date and you want to meet people, do that. But don't necessarily close yourself off to the opportunity that you just might meet the one. And for me, lightning struck and I met the one.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you all so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and your insight. Dr. Ariel Cooperberg, Keith Riddell, and Tara Mandarano, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're watching us from home, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the show. We'll see you again in the studio next week. Have a great night.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Play 4 games of bingo from the comfort of your own home each Monday at 7 p.m. for your chance to win money from our $2,000 regular bingo or $5,000 super bingo night. Kiwanis TV Bingo, Mondays at 7 p.m. on Rogers TV.
There are soldiers in my family. I first joined the Legion to honor their service. Now I volunteer there to be of service myself. I know my membership helps Canadian veterans get the support they need. I've personally seen it help veterans get through some pretty dark times. Many have come out stronger than ever. For a lot of them, the Legion feels like home. It's nice to be part of that.